Now, it's quite impossible to change your past. I mean, you can go to therapy and try to reinterpret your past. So, there are ways that we try to change our past, but it's hard and it often doesn't work. But with some effort, you can actually change. Right now, you can change how your brain will predict in the future. So, for example, you can invest a little energy and time to curate new experiences for yourself. You can try new activities. You can learn new ideas. Every experience that you cultivate and everything you learn right now is an investment that seeds your brain to predict differently in a moment from now, and therefore to act differently. So just in the same way that spending energy to exercise is a good investment in a healthy brain and a healthy body, investing energy and time in cultivating new experiences for yourself is a good investment in giving your brain more flexibility to predict differently in the future. And that is kind of a big deal because it means that not only do you have more control over what you will feel and do in the future, but you also have more responsibility for your actions and your experiences than you might think, or, than you might want. In this very moment, as in every moment, your brain is cultivating your past as a means of controlling who you will become in the future. Now let's talk a little bit more about control. Perhaps you've heard that the human brain works like this, where you have an ancient layer, an inner layer that is inherited from reptiles, and that contains your most basic urges. Sometimes people then talk about how this inner lizard that you have is supposedly wrapped up by a middle layer, a so-called limbic system inherited from ancient mammals that contains the circuits for emotion. And that the outermost layer, called the neocortex, neo for new, is said to house the parts of the brain for thinking and rationality and decision making. And this rational part of your brain is supposed to, control your inner beast, to regulate your inner beast. This idea of a mind at war with itself, with the brain as a battleground between emotion and instincts on the one hand and reason on the other for the control of your behavior, can be traced all the way back to Plato. And it's one of the most cherished beliefs that we have about what it means to be human in the Western world. It's embedded in our legal systems. It's embedded in our understanding of economics and so on. Unfortunately, this view of the brain and brain evolution is also a myth. And scientists have known that it is a myth since about the 1970s, based on genetic evidence. We know now that all mammals, and maybe even all vertebrates, share the same brain plan, which means that you, my friends, and I all share a brain that is very, very similar to a blood-sucking lamprey. My colleague and friend Barb Finley likes to say that the human brain is not a lizard brain in drag. The only animal on the planet who has an inner lizard brain is a lizard. When we look at the human brain with a naked eye, it looks different than, say, a mouse brain or dog brain or a fish brain or a lizard brain, because over evolutionary time, brains have reorganized as they grow larger, even though the plan for building the brain is essentially the same. So if all mammals and maybe even all vertebrates have the same brain plan, then what makes the human brain capable of creating complex cultures and building up civilizations in a way that no other animal really can. And a key idea in understanding how this happens is to understand that the human brain, your brain, when surrounded by a chorus of other human brains, all of which are attached to human bodies, allow us to make things up that become real. For example, humans have made up something called money. Money is real. It's a special kind of real called social reality. To create social reality, we impose functions on physical things like pieces of paper or metal discs. Then we make up a function like trading for material goods, and we agree on that function and we give it a name like money or currency. We communicate about it, and then voila, the function becomes real. So money is real because a group of humans have agreed, sometimes not consciously, but even by their actions, that pieces of paper can be traded for material goods. And then poof, the money, the little pieces of paper have value. If we all decided, or even some of us decided, a significant number of us decided that little pieces of paper no longer had value, then they wouldn't. And that is actually something that happened when a bunch of mortgages, lost their value within, a moment, the blink of an eye, because some guys in suits decided they were no longer valuable, and then poof, they weren't. Social reality even lets us impose functions on things that are invisible. This is one of my favorites, called air rights, which is the empty space above a building. People have imposed a function on this empty space called air rights, and then humans sell air rights to other humans who then own this empty space and can build in it. This kind of ability to create reality like this is uniquely human. Here's another example, the color spectrum. Color is continuous. That is a continuous stream of light at different wavelengths. But people in a culture draw lines in the continuum to define discrete colors. These lines are made up, but within a culture, people agree that these discrete colors are real, and it influences how we act on these wavelengths of light. No English-speaking human with 3 cones in their retina would confuse blue and purple, but these wavelengths are part of the same color category in other cultures, which draw different lines in different places along this continuum, and therefore act on this sense data in very different ways. Now, the color of skin is also on a continuum, from very light to very dark. Skin color reveals something about where your ancestors lived in relation to the sun, and evolved from a tug of war between 2 vitamins, folic acid and vitamin D. But humans long dead drew dividing lines in this continuum and imposed a meaning on skin tone that it did not evolve to have. And today, we have to live with the consequences of those lines that disadvantage one group at the expense of another. Skin tone, that is how much melanin is in your skin, is physically real. The lines that have been drawn, which we call racial groups, are socially real. And while race might be socially real, the assignment to one group or another has very, very real physical consequences for people. We can draw lines in the sand and create a country, and therefore create citizens and immigrants. And when we redraw those lines, we recreate different categories or different groups of citizens and immigrants. So this is something that that we do, really without thinking about it. I mean, the idea of drawing a line in the sand and all of a sudden, you used to be the citizen of one country and now you're the citizen of another country. And other people who used to be your neighbors are now immigrants. You and I create social reality with other people without even trying because we have human brains. To the best of our knowledge, no other animal brain has this superpower to create social reality. Scientists don't know for sure how our brains develop this capacity, but we suspect that it has something to do with a suite of abilities that I call the 5 C's. The first C is creativity. The same creativity that permits us to make art and music also lets us draw a line in the dirt and call it the border of a country. The second C is communication. We can communicate efficiently with other brains in order to share ideas, such as the idea of a country and its borders. For humans, communication usually means symbols like language. So it's language is a very efficient way to communicate ideas and to create social reality. The third C is copying. Humans learn reliably by copying one another in order to establish laws and norms to allow us to predict one another's behavior, which is easier on our body budgets. And the fourth C is cooperation, which we often do on a vast geographic scale. Creativity, communication, copying, and cooperation, 4 of the 5 C's, arose with genetic changes that gave our species a big, complex brain. But to make and maintain social reality, you also need a 5th C called compression. Now, I'm not going to have the time to completely explain how compression works in your brain. What I will say is that it's a special way of summarizing information, that you take small details, sense data that occurs in the more sensory parts of your brain, and you summarize the information, rooting out the redundancies until you get to very efficient summaries that are represented at the front of your brain. And this is what allows us, this compression, what allows us to think abstractly. Now, other animals can compress information too, but not as powerfully as the human brain can. And in part, we're able to do this because our brains are kind of souped up at the front metabolically, and just given the size of the human brain. I mean, the size of the human brain is, it's not like we have unusually large brains necessarily. It's just that they're wired well for compression. So each of the 5 C's is found in other animals to some, extent. So for example, crows are creative problem solvers who can use twigs as tools. Elephants can communicate in low rumbles that travel for miles. Whales copy one another's songs. Ants cooperate to find food and defend their nest. And even bees can use abstraction. They wiggle their bums to tell their hive mates where to find nectar. But in humans, the 5 C's intertwine and reinforce one another in a way that lets us take things to a whole other level. Because we can think abstractly, because we have those big, summaries that our brains can make by compression, we can impose new functions on things and that they didn't evolve to have, and then create reality. We can take things that are physically different from one another and understand that at various times in human history, they have served a similar function as money. As far as we know, humans are the only animals whose brains have enough capacity for compression and abstraction to create social reality in this way. Now, social reality is an incredible gift. We can simply make up stuff, invent different customs and laws, and if other people treat them as real, then they become real. But social reality also has its limits. After all, it's constrained by physical reality. You know, we could all agree that we could walk through walls, but that doesn't make it actually happen. We could all agree that, you know, it's possible to eat ground glass as food, but that wouldn't make it possible to do. Similarly, we could all agree that a virus is not contagious and therefore we don't have to wear masks. But the fact is, a virus doesn't really care what we believe. Anyone with a nice wet set of lungs can become a suitable host. Social reality is a human superpower, but a superpower works best when you know that you have it. And I should say, anyone who's ever read comic books or sees movies about superpowers knows that this is the case. Imagine what would happen if, like, Superman didn't know that he was super strong. Now, I've taken you through a couple of the lessons in 7.5 lessons about the brain, but there are others that I haven't touched on today. One of which is that you have the kind of nature that requires nurture. An infant brain is not a miniature adult brain. It's a brain that is waiting for wiring instructions from the world. So because of the kinds of genes that we have, our brains are, when we're born, we're born with brains that are unfinished. And infants require certain inputs from the world in order for their brains to develop normally. Some of that input is physical. That is, for example, there's a critical period when infants are born. They have to be exposed to natural light. Natural light has to hit the retina of the eye and has to make its way to the brain. And if this doesn't happen within a particular period of time, then the infant will never be able to see properly, because that input from the world is required for the brain to wire itself normally. So some of the input that comes from the world is physical, and the other part is social, meaning the wiring instructions for an infant's brain aren't just physical, they're also social. By which I mean, it's not just, you have to do more than just feed and water an infant for that infant's brain to develop normally. You also have to talk to the infant and cuddle the infant and make eye contact with the infant. All of these things which we do with infants, different cultures do things differently, but all infants in all cultures need some kind of human contact in order to develop normally. If they don't receive it, their brains don't develop normally, and actually their bodies don't develop normally either. And we know this because of unfortunate kind of real world experiments that were done where children were warehoused in Romania in orphanages. So, I mean, we've always known that children, how we treat our children matters, but it matters much more than I think anybody ever suspected. And this is another lesson that's discussed in 7.5 lessons. Another topic, which I'm not going to go into in detail today, is the fact that we are the caretakers of each other's nervous systems. We are social animals. So that means that our own brains don't just make deposits and withdrawals into our own body budget. We metaphorically make deposits and withdrawals into other people's body budgets. The best thing for a human nervous system is another human. And the worst thing for a human nervous system is also another human. And it's miraculous, but it's not just the things that we do, but even things that we say and how we say them can have a major impact on other people's body budgets. I can text 3 little words to a friend who lives halfway around the world, and I can change her breathing and her metabolism and her heart rate. You can read something that was written like in the Bible or the Quran, thousands of years ago, a poem, and it can affect you in the moment, provide you with comfort or consternation. Either way, it's affecting the actual biology inside your body. And this is the power that words have. And so I also talk about this in the book, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. Another topic that I talk about in detail is that when it comes to humans, as a species, variation is the norm. And in fact, actually today, I have an opinion piece in The Guardian on this exact topic. As a species, we love variability. We love variability in the things that we eat, and in the movies that we see, and the books that we read, and the clothes that we wear. But sometimes although we love variation and novelty, we tend to have, as a species, a little bit of trouble with variation in each other. And so this is also discussed in one of the lessons. So actually, this is the American cover, the US cover of 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. I should have put in the UK cover because the book just came out today. So it's a beautiful cover. So I hope that that this talk has whet your appetite, and I will thank you for your attention.
Thank